This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. In the midst of some April drizzle, Mike and I are going to recount what happened in April here in the city of Dover. Mike Gillis, welcome to the Dover Download Podcast. I'm not sure if you've been here before, but...
Well, Chris, I tell you, this is the highlight of at least the next 30 minutes.
I think that's an exaggeration, but... So I want to preface two things on this podcast. If you came here hoping to learn more about milfoil, a January, February, and March predominant topic, I think we're going to disappoint you.
But it will certainly be a topic for future discussions.
Right.
So
right. Come back in May. Probably the biggest thing that was accomplished by a board committee or commission was April 1st, not necessarily April Fool's Day, but on April 1st, the city council, after a relatively concise workshop, moved into a special meeting and adopted a tax cap compliant budget.
Adopted a $227.3 million budget. But that was, of course, as we've said before, that was after several weeks of meetings and workshops and public hearings on the budget. So a lot of work went into the process leading up to the first.
I don't want to speak for you, but I appreciated that the new counselors did I think a good balance of learning from the more senior counselors who were able to say, oh, we've talked about this before and here's what we're talking about. But they didn't shy away from saying, hey, what about this? And why do we do this? And learning, not necessarily the arrogant style of learning of saying, hey, I'm new and this is my fresh idea, so you should accept it. But in the sense of saying, here's an idea, have we explored it? And getting that answer either from the manager or staff, or in a lot of ways, the council itself saying, great question, and here's the answer, because that could have been done behind closed doors. But it's great to be able to have that conversation on camera so that the public learns as well.
Yeah, and you're right. I think there was a really good balance of counselors with some institutional knowledge and those new counselors. But it can be difficult for new counselors because often you're elected, and among the first things you're doing is deliberating on probably what is the most significant decision they're going to have to make over their tenure, which is the budget.
So beyond the adoption of the budget, which again was April 1st, a week later, the council met again in regular meeting session, and probably the big thing that they tackled, and they tackled more than one thing, but the big thing they tackled was looking at some of the energy savings performance elements at the McConnell Center in particular, but solar as well on other city properties, and working with a company in ESCO, which is a energy savings performance contract service company, looking at opportunities, whether it's at the arena, whether it's at the wastewater treatment plant, whether it's at any of our pump stations, these city-owned properties that use energy, and how we can more efficiently go through that process. And the Energy Commission really has taken the lead on that. And there was a workshop to go over it as well. But I think that is probably the next big thing that will be continued to have conversations on. Certainly, the council awarded the project here at the McConnell Center, and then I think it's waiting to get more feedback on some of these other potential.
Yeah, and I think this is an exciting project. I mean, it's obviously a long-term project, but this really sort of positions the city to focus more on energy efficiency, but also, on-site generation, essentially, with the solar component. Obviously, a big part of what we're going to see, at least initially, is right here in the building we're in right now, is at the McConnell Center.
The other thing, and the third thing to really, I think, cover for the council this month was a lot of reprogramming.
Yes.
In the fall, in December in particular, as we were finalizing the capital improvements program, and as the council was having its review and discussion about the program, the manager identified potential projects that we're wrapping up or have wrapped up that we might have savings from that we could reprogram to offset needed debt financing for future projects. So beginning in, I believe, late February and continuing through the April 22nd council meeting, the finance director put forward a series of resolutions to take those savings and reallocate them to projects that had not had debt financing issued yet. And so we saw a lot of that, whether it was for the Henry Law reconstruction project, whether it was for the aforementioned McConnell Center roof and
Horn Street.
And Horn Street. And yeah, the Horn Street, that's good to get that design going. So that was probably, in my mind, the other big thing that the council accomplished. Again, not that they didn't accomplish other things, but of note is recognizing this ability to save the taxpayer money by using funding that we had as quote unquote surplus on project.
It's a strategic reallocation of the city's resources. So,
and so the listener understands when we have savings on these projects, we can't just go back to the bank, as it were, and say, "Oh, we didn't need that full loan. Here's the money back."
Right.
So it's money that's debt financed that we have to pay back through a series of negotiated payments, just like you pay your mortgage or a credit card or however you want to look at debt. And so the idea is we've already got this loan. Let's use it to fund future projects or other projects that maybe aren't so lucky to be coming in at a surplus, and then minimize or mitigate future debt, which in this day and age is probably going to have a higher interest rate. So should we wrap it up? Were there nothing else happened this month?
I think, no, I mean, I like to say that after the council finishes the budget process, it's, everybody needs a little bit of a breather. They'll be picking things back up though, come May. So
yeah, they kick off the first Wednesday in May, the day that after this podcast drops, we'll be having a workshop about housing and the activities that the housing planner has undertaken in the past year. Moving on, some of the other boards and commissions. What do you have on your list, Mike? What's important?
Well, we can, I guess,
Mr.
move on to the
Newsman.
planning board, right? So the planning board, they had 2 meetings in April. I would say that the planning board's 2 meetings were primarily consumed by 3 projects, at least, that are all transfer of development right projects. The first being Jefferson Drive. That's probably the most closely watched. The planning board had continued that application from March, waiting for some legal guidance, to April. And in April, they voted 8-1 in favor of that project. It's a little bit of a balancing act, but they did move ahead with that. I don't know if you have anything you want to share about that project in particular. I know we've talked about it. It's been, before them for a little while now.
What's interesting there is, having been around for the original Jefferson Drive, it's an example of an infill development site because that project is now 15, 20 years old. So it's part of the fabric. And so from an infill project, it's got a lot of merit and it's a good, moderately priced housing development. And hopefully the new units will continue that because we certainly need housing at all levels and all price points. And so we'll be able to see that. I think the main thing it does emphasize, though, is that the planning board continues to try to be realistic about housing opportunity, but also recognize abutter concerns and abutter impact. And I know the Transfer Development Rights Subcommittee is still looking at their role and the amendments that they're trying to put forward. They're not trying to eliminate the program. And I think the planning director, were she here, would probably agree with me that the amount of development we've seen and the amount of housing we've adopted, which is almost the most in the state for any community, would not be there without this program. And so on the one hand, it's great because we're providing housing to the community and we're helping with that supply issue. But on the other hand, certainly there's always the push-pull of when does additional housing become greedy housing,
right?
And how does the planning board navigate that? I've said before, the council has a tough job a lot of times they're making policy decisions and they are held accountable by elections on those decisions. So there's stress involved.
Mm-hmm.
I think the planning board sometimes has more stressful because you almost never come out to support a housing project.
Right.
It's usually neighbors that are going to say, wait a second, I've lived here and I've had quiet and I've had X and I've had Y.
Right.
I remember someone coming to a planning board meeting when I was a planning director and saying, I'm not going to be able to go nude in my backyard anymore because there's going to be a house 100 feet away. And yeah, I hear what you're saying. I understand that. Part of me also wants to say, still go nude. It's they're looking at you, not them. But I get what they're saying. It's always a shock. But the reality is we want to continue to welcome people to this community. We want to continue to be an accepting community with housing levels at all attainability. And I think the planning board recognizes that and is moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the planning board also recognizes that, the TDR process itself is evolving.
Yep.
That's part of why we have the subcommittee. But, probably an example of that is the TDR for Stark Avenue, which actually, was scaled back from a 3-unit configuration, partly in response to the feedback that they received.
Exactly.
And, of course, the other TDR project that they had considered, which was a mixed-use project off of Dover Point Road. That's kind of a different TDR application too, right? Because that combines
and that
residential
property,
density and
that property, which is adjacent to the vehicle refueling site out there. It's zoned residential, but it's clearly not in a strictly residential zone. So the mixed use application made sense. It's across the street from mixed use, and I remember years ago, there was an opportunity to build a medical office on that site. Prior to that, there was a variance to build a bank on that site. It has really gone back and forth between the uses out there. And one of the things I think is good is it's going to share access points with the vehicle refueling. Yep. So it cuts down on curb cuts in that congested area.
I think the only other thing I would probably mention, Chris, is that the other thing that the planning board did was they reviewed the proposed zoning amendments, Chapter 153, which is the site plan regulations, and Chapter 157, which are the subdivision regulations. They haven't obviously taken any action on these yet, but there's been a lot of discussion. The updates are primarily, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, intended just to modernize the review process and clarify some of the standards that have emerged, which is typical.
Yeah, again, back to your point about streamlining process and recognizing the evolution of how applications are reviewed and going through the regs. That's one of the things that I'm glad the planning board has continued to do is annually take a look at the site subdivision and zoning ordinance and see how we can be ahead of the curve on some of these issues. One thing tangential to the planning board, Waterfront Committee met in April after not meeting in March. They elected the chair and vice chair, or I should say reelected the chair and vice chair to their roles. They also had a presentation from myself and the assistant recreation director, Rick Conway, about the vendor that we are looking to select for the pavilion. The pavilion is new, obviously, to Nebi Park, which is also new. And there is some vendor space in the lower level, and we've worked with the purchasing department to come up with a request for proposals where we got some responses of those interested in renting canoes and kayaks out to the public. So that's a process. We're now negotiating that lease and hope to bring it to the council in May. But Quiddick was very happy to hear people were interested in providing that service and helping to activate the park and the pavilion itself.
The only other one I'd probably mention, Chris, is the school board. School board had 2 meetings in April, a special meeting at the very beginning of April and then a regular meeting. And I would say the special meeting was to talk specifically about the school districts basically choosing a new insurance provider and extracting itself from SchoolCare. And the second regular meeting, although they did discuss several other items, that was also a topic of discussion during that meeting. And it's probably important to note that over the course of the month, the The district filed suit to seek emergency relief to prevent SchoolCare from halting claims, which they've threatened to do starting May 1st.
This is a critical junction, and I want to reiterate one thing that the city attorney has said, and that counselors have said, and certainly Dr. Boston and Manager Joyle have said, which is this discussion, whether it's the court case, the SchoolCare assessment, or the city's obligation to pay that, is not about the actual care. We want to make sure that the taxpayers are protected. We want to make sure that the employees who have been paying their premiums are protected and that they get what they have paid for and what they deserve. And so certainly there is an aspect of this of you're not allowed to assess us this, and you can't provide justification legally for it. So we're going to ask the court to get into the middle of it. But at the other hand, we need to do this to protect the taxpayer and those employees.
Right.
Because if it happens to the school employees, it could happen to any of us.
Yep, absolutely. I know there were a number of questions, too, about what happened to a scheduled meeting between a joint meeting of the school board and city council where the Secretary of State was expected to attend, and the Secretary of State had declined to attend after the lawsuit was filed, so that meeting did not occur.
Right. Another group that met this month was the Parking Commission, and they met to endorse an idea that we're bringing to the council in May, which is the city has some parking spaces in the Orchard Street lot and has been approached about swapping essentially those spaces with private property owner. It's a weird situation, and you might remember some of the history of this, Mike. The Orchard Street parking lot was a neighborhood. That whole area, there was a tannery, there were homes, there were businesses. And in the mid-'70s, the city and the housing authority partnered to merge all of those. And really, there's like 3 buildings, including what's now Ember Restaurant, and then the 2 homes/businesses behind Julia Creations. Those are really the only remnants of that era. But certain property owners were able to get easements for parking in the surface parking lot that was created. And so we are going to potentially, if the council goes along with it, obtain 10 of those parking spaces to increase the public parking supply. And in exchange, we will provide 5 spaces in an area adjacent that we don't see much utilization for, and 5 parking permits in the parking garage. So that was something that came before the Parking Commission, because obviously parking is involved, and they endorsed that idea, and we're going to the city council in May to finalize that. Other than that, they had a pretty light month at that level.
Well, I think that probably wraps it up for us, Chris, for this month. So. But
another, I guess Q1 is Q1 and a half is done, and we'll see it in May.
Q1 and a half, yeah.
We'll see you in May, and enjoy the day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.